Who's gonna cast the first stone? It's my body and my body's nobody's business but my own. Nobody's business but my own.
Hi, my name is Carol Downer, and I have a website called Women's Health in Women's Hands.org. This website sort of summarizes about 40 years of our history in the women's health movement, which I want to tell you about. This got started in California right before Roe v. Wade. I mean, when I say right before, about a year before. And at that time, abortion was hard to get in California, even though it had been legalized. But it had to be done in an accredited hospital, and most hospitals, as today, didn't want to touch abortion, okay? That's a lesson for us all to learn. Hospitals, in general, don't like to mess with abortion. So at that time, we were thinking about learning how to do it ourselves. We had become acquainted with an illegal abortionist in West Hollywood, and he was kind of a laid-back guy, you know, sexual revolution kind of guy. And he said it was okay if we came and hung out and learned how to do abortion. Of course, he never said he was going to teach us, which he didn't. He didn't give us a minute of his time, really. But he did allow us to hang out, which I and several other women did. And one day, and by the way, he was using a device to do this abortion. These were early abortions, which, just pretend like this isn't here. It just consisted of this syringe right here, 50 cc syringe, and that shoots out through this flexible cannula. Now, he was using a cannula that was a little bigger. This is a 4 millimeter, and he was using like an 8 millimeter cannula. But not that big, and it was pretty flexible. And he was able to complete these abortions within, you know, a relatively short period of time. And he had no problems. And we could see it was a very safe, simple procedure. So one day, when I was there waiting to get in and see how this was done, I mean, I had the method demonstrated just as I'm showing it to you, but I hadn't actually seen it happen. I went in, following my friend, into a little room, and believe me, it was a small room. With his illegal clinic was right next to the Christian Science reading room on Santa Monica Boulevard, across the street from the coffee shop. And it was just like a shotgun kind of thing, living room, you know, the front room and the middle room and the back. And that little exam room was, you know, very tiny. At any rate, I followed her, and there was a very young woman on the table getting an IUD. And she was lying on the table with her legs open, facing me and the doctor. He had the speculum in. And the light was over his shoulder, flashing, you know, down on her vagina. And I saw her cervix. And I was just absolutely amazed. It was, first of all, it was so close. It was only a few inches from the opening. And secondly, it was very simple and beautiful, bright pink, healthy pink, like a little donut with a little hole in the middle. And that's where the IUD was going to go in. Well, I literally, my knees buckled. I was that awestruck. And I realized that if we knew how simple and easy it was to do abortions, why would there be 5,000 women a year in the United States dying from illegal abortions at that time? Why were we sticking knitting needles inside ourselves? You know, why were we going to cranks or acids? I mean, all kinds of falling downstairs, kicking, having somebody kick us in the stomach, all that kind of stuff. So I couldn't wait to get out and share this with other people and to say we just got to do this. And fortunately, we did get a few more women, and we wanted to start our own clinic. The abortionist had been arrested, and we were raising money for him, and we just thought it was high time that women not be, just always there with a male savior. We thought it's time for us to do this. So I went in on the Saturdays, and my husband took care of the kids. He took them to the beach while I went in and with my friends. So we had our first meeting, our larger meeting, in Venice at the Every Woman's Bookstore. Now, the Every Woman's Bookstore is not there today, but it was quite a gathering place. And we had about 30 women show up, and we had put out kind of an enigmatic little notice, but if you read it, you kind of got the message that we were going to talk about learning how to do something directly. So everyone was waiting, and our little group took turns talking about the different aspects. So my role was to do what I just did here, which was to show this equipment to them and describe to them how the abortion was going to go. Well, you should have seen the expressions on these women's faces. I mean, they were just pale, they were in agony. They were upset. They could, the whole subject was just scary to them. And I could see that until I demystified this for them, they were going to keep on thinking that abortion was this thing that you mostly would die of. So I invited them into the next room where there was a desk, and I cleared the things off. At that day, I happened to be wearing a very long dress, and I wasn't wearing any panties, so I just lay back on the table using the dress as my pad, and pull back, put in the speculum, and as we had learned to do in the clinic, and handed around a flashlight. Well, first everybody was kind of standing back a few feet in kind of a semicircle, and I thought, oh, they're going to think I'm an exhibitionist, or I don't know what they're going to think, but I did it. And as a matter of fact, they loved it. They all came close. They crowded in. They took turns looking, and everyone had, a comment and a question, and we talked. And in that one short evening, we knocked in the head so many old doctors' tales, Like I had a tip uterus, and I said, oh yes, that means it lies kind of in the back of my cavity there. When you look in, you don't see it head on, it kind of falls back. The doctor told me that's why I get pregnant so easily, because I had 6 children at this time. And so it seemed like, well, something might be going on like that. A little later in the evening, another woman put hers in, and her uterus tipped upwards. When you looked in, it kind of pointed up. And she said, yeah, the doctor told me that's why I got pregnant so easily. Well, we just laughed our heads off because we realized that these doctors don't know what they're talking about. I mean, we learned the difference between a secretion and a discharge. We found out that, yes, if we have a vaginal infection, there's going to be a discharge. On the other hand, if we're normal and we're ovulating, we are going to be having secretions throughout the month that vary and tell us where we are in our menstrual cycle. So we just learned a huge amount, and we decided, especially since abortion was becoming more available in California at that time, especially in Los Angeles, that numerous small hospitals were offering them. We decided that our time was better spent introducing women to our own bodies, and we called it the Self-Help Clinic. Over a period of years, and today there are still women's clinics. They're still that started with the self-help principle in the Seattle, Atlanta, Northern California are all clinics that were started by women who learned how to provide abortion. And when Roe v. Wade were the first ones to open up women-controlled clinics. Also, women have used the same techniques to learn how to be midwives. The group of lay midwives were arrested up in Santa Cruz in 1974, and because that was also practicing medicine without a license. Oh, I forgot to say I got arrested doing this. I forgot about that. They did a observation of us, and it turned out that this one presentation that I gave, in which to a little group of young women, I talked to them about yeast condition, and the woman that was showing her cervix for that day, our staff person, happened to have yeast condition at that time, and she'd gone across the street and bought some yogurt and asked me if I would please put it in, because that's a remedy that we had learned in their, talking to women across the country. So, based on this woman's report, who turned out to be an ex-nun, I was arrested and put on trial. We successfully fought it. We went right to trial, and the jury acquitted me, and at the end, the lead juror gave me a card that said, "Carol Downer, you are an upper." So that is kind of by way of self-introduction, but I do want to very quickly say that it also led to the development of a technique developed by Lorraine Rothman, who came to that first meeting at the Venice bookstore, went home and developed a prototype and she called it a Delum. And very, very quickly, it consists of a collection jar, so that when you pump, the material goes into the jar. It's slower, but for us, in minimally trained women who were just learning through doing self-examination with each other, it was far safer. Because the other device that I showed you, that the illegal abortionist used, he used it, maybe 10, even 20 times a day. So therefore, he had become very adept, very proficient. Now, in our case, we were not doing that. So we had to divide the job up, and this let us do it. One person, one woman, very gingerly put in a sterilized cannula, being careful not to touch the vaginal walls into the cervix, until the woman, who had no anesthesia and was comfortable, because we didn't use a big, blunt, wide instrument, said, "Well, I can feel it at the back wall." And then another woman then would use the syringe. Now, Lorraine added a feature called a one-way valve, so that the air would always come in this direction and never go back. Maybe you can even hear it hiss out. And there was another woman in our group who would be by the woman, explaining to her as it went along helping her to see the tube. And we didn't know whether it was an abortion or not, although we did do uterine size checks on each other to make sure that it wasn't too far along. And this was, up to 6 or 8 weeks. This was very adequate. After the procedure, or even as it was proceeding, though, we soon realized if it was an abortion, because the material would be clumpy and watery, whereas if it was our plain old menstrual period, which is what we did to learn how to do the procedure, that was our technique of learning and also demonstrating, the material would just creep out. It would take ages to get it out. And when it came out, we would dump it into a bowl of cold water, and it would just circle around like little spaghettis of, red. Now that's just a very, very quick introduction to, a very dynamic women's health movement that has written books, established clinics, developed new techniques, belonged to national organizations, testified, organized, gone around the world, but just to give you an idea of what women can do when we break down those barriers and work with each other and share, it just liberates all kinds of energy. We always knew that we were on target in the self-help movement. I mean, it worked. We felt better. We've learned so much about women's health care. I mean, we could start an alternative, to gynecology. I mean, it all can be done with, in fact, a much higher quality because we share, equally with each other, and we could put the information together in a much better way. But it wasn't until very recently that I became aware of some history that's been done of early Europe and in the Middle Ages and the events that went on, specifically with the burning of the witches, that connected up with me. And I really want to share this with you because it's been hard to figure out how did it come to be, that women couldn't share with each other. Why are we just so alienated from each other and so uncomfortable with our own bodies? Well, this really explained it. Now, Deirdre English and Barbara Ehrenreich wrote a very good book, and this is close to 40 years ago, called Midwives and Nurses. And they did, give the facts of the witch burning and, explain that a lot of them were healers or midwives. And, this helped us to, see where we fit in with that historical tradition. But so much more research has been done in the last couple of decades that shed light on this history that, it has been seen as a much, much more huge historical development, not only in the complete defeat of women. I have to say, it was the burning of the witches came at the same time, that the nobility and the church and the mercantile class instituted many, many things that were basically to establish capitalism, that women, we were forced to become housewives, unwaged. Men were forced into the factories, and we were forced to maintain our husbands and children and all the children that we now had, because we no longer knew how to control our own fertility due to the attacks of the witches. That it just it helps us to understand. I mean, I want to say, before I go into a little bit more of this history, that those of us in the radical feminist movement have always been very opposed to U.S. imperialism. We've always been opposed to the American style of capitalism, for sure, and capitalism in general. I don't see that any of the other so-called economic systems have done much more for women than capitalism, so I'm not here to espouse them. What I think can happen, and I really want to share with you this vision that came to me when I read the book by Sylvia Federici on Caliban and The Witch, is that Ms. Federici, a very noted researcher and professor, has put together a historical explanation that can help us to see how we got in this position in the first place and what we need to do to get out of it. And for example, Sylvia is a Marxist in her analyses, which means that although she has criticisms of Marx theoretically, because he did not include women in his analysis. Big omission, okay. And so where she disagrees from Marx is that he felt that capitalism evolved out of feudalism. And feudalism, for people that don't know just exactly how that worked, it's basically, after the Roman Empire fell, and then basically there were rich people and slaves and small, peasants and so forth. Then, because of the attacks of the barbarians coming down from the north, people sought protection under the nobles who had who were warriors and could fight and protect them. And then, of course, let's not forget the Catholic Church, which, rushed in there and took a stranglehold of the whole society. And then the mercantilists, who were, the merchants, that the Marco Polos and the people that brought goods back and forth and, made their money that way. So feudalism consisted in the nobles providing protection and the ordinary people having little serfs, is what they were called, were in little huts. And they were there to work for the Lord, mostly to harvest his crops and tend to his animals and mine his whatever resources he had on the property, etc. And the Lord would let each one of them have a small plot of land for their daily, sustenance, little, just basic sustenance. And, that was how people subsisted at a pretty low level. Well, in addition to Federici, she and some other sociologists, or historians, I should say, looked back and looked at that history of what was happening with feudalism, and this is around in the 14th century. Well, first of all, there was the Black Death, and this was a plague that, I hear different estimates, half to 2/3 of the population died over a period of, a year or two, And I mean, it drastically changed everything. And the serfs, um, you know, got higher wages because there was few. If the ones that did work, that did get wages, got higher wages, and there were so few that they would leave the village and go into the town. These were small towns that were in Europe at this time. As a consequence, this was affecting the stability of the feudal system. Then there was a couple of decades of what they called the Little Ice Age. And this spanned, as they say, several decades, where basically their crops died. It was almost as cold as, the Ice Age. Here again, the population went down, not from starvation apparently, but more from just not having as many babies. Then what were the lords going to do about this? Because it was causing serfs to revolt. Many times women were in the leadership in those. And something had to be done. And by the way, not that women in the feudal community led the ideal life, by no means. It was a patriarchy, a fraternal, organization. The church was very dominant. However, women were out there with men, participating much more in the community. They worked in the fields, they worked in the gardens, and they were not in this abject state that we found ourselves in, after the witch burnings and capitalism rose up. You wouldn't find a woman that thought she had to put on makeup or wear high heels in order to attract a man. That was long before that. At any rate, they came up with this idea, first of all, of enclosing the commons. At that time the Lord had his lands, but over and above his lands, there were other areas that were accepted to be used by everybody to herd their sheep or their cattle, or to fish in the streams or go in the forest. And the people did depend on this to supplement their income. As I say, they just had these subsistence plots. They enclosed this, and Marx records this very extensively, and it's very well accepted, that the result of enclosing this was, and everybody's seen Robin Hood, of course, and how Robin was always getting into trouble because he and his merry men were going into the forest and shooting the game and fishing in the waters, and even to the point of executing them. So what did they come up with? Besides the enclosures, they came up with the witch burnings. Now the thing about this is that a lot of people have mystified this, and they either think these witches were wonderful and just romantic figures, or they think they were causing storms and evil and dancing over cauldrons. In fact, history, looking into the history shows that mostly these were women, old women, mostly women. There were few men that were called witches, but they invented the crime of witchcraft. This was different than sorcery, and it specifically had to do with the fact that the charges had to do with fertility. It said that women, these witches, were killing the fetuses in the womb before birth, or else they were taking away the generative powers of men. So it was not mysterious, And it didn't have anything to do with, this sort of romanticism. It did involve a lot of midwives. Midwife was chief suspect, of course, because she attended births. She was like at the hub of the community. But it wasn't just the midwives or the healers. It was maybe just poor women. Everybody was poor, but especially when a woman was alone and old, she was vulnerable. And this lasted over 4 centuries. We're talking right through the Renaissance, right through the rise of science. Some of the wonderful scientists, Francis Bacon et al., they all just thought witch burning was great. And it was not a hysteria, where the people rose up and went down and found the, witches and burned them. No, the church would be the place, and the Lord would go in and put in notices. Do you know anyone in your community that you think, could be a witch? And then if someone got reported, well, then they would question them. And of course, at that time, torture was routine. They were all tortured. That was part of the way of getting the truth out of people at that time. And then once they got the dirt on them, and they took careful records, that's why today we can go and read many of those records that were faithfully cataloged, all due process, then they were burned at the stake. Now that, as I said, went over and it went down through many, many communities, Scotland, down through France, Italy, England, Europe, okay? It was very widespread. And along with the enclosures and the forcing men to go into the factories to work, with wages, and women to be the unwaged, to be there in the home. Because for one thing, the whole knowledge of birth control had been lost. So women were just at the mercy of their fertility. If they had sex, which they did, they wanted to, no doubt, but they also had to, and got pregnant, they were going to have that baby if it survived. So consequently, the rulers got their way, and that is that there was a great deal more babies born. But there was something else that happened, and here's where I think Federici really takes the broader thing, and shows us, is that she calls this the primitive accumulation of capital. I know that those lords in the church and the mercantilists were already well-to-do. However, remember, mostly it was in the form of land or animals. They didn't really have much what you'd call capital. But by forcing men to go into and working at low wages, and then having a woman at night take that man and feed him dinner, give him sex, make him feel good, send him back into the job the next day, he's going to be more efficient. He's going to have much more productivity. And, of course, the woman is producing a next generation, and so therefore they amassed much, much more wealth. This was the primitive accumulation. You always wonder how rich people got rich in the first place. Well, I can tell you, and we think about it, it's not because they're so smart or because they work so hard. It's basically because they stole it. They killed, they burned, they rampaged, and that's what they did. And that's how they did it in Europe. And they used that capital to fund expeditions and explorations to go to the New World and to other parts of the world that were not yet as settled. And and to talk about this, I have something I'd like to read just to give you some idea of the, what shall I say, the atrocities that went on for several centuries, here again, several centuries, and we still by no means have overcome them, I mean, in the third world, of the killing, butchering, prisoning, slaves. I mean, they extracted all the gold and silver, for example, from Peru. That's how Europe got capital. That's where they got their coins. I mean, this was putting capitalism on its, larger scale, where they, gained domination and profession. The universities rose because the enclosure of knowledge, all of this. At any rate, I want to read this because it, to me, makes us realize that as feminists, if we want to change this world, we're going to first have to do it by getting control of our own bodies so that we will have more in touch with our uteruses and more power. But we also have a common destiny with the peoples of the colonized areas of the world, because we have been screwed by the very same people using very similar methods. They carried their witch burning right into Latin America. They called the Indians devils. Their first, the priest went in, one of their first jobs was to knock down all the idols in the churches and to burn them at the stake, and then, of course, to take them all prisoner and make them into slaves to produce wealth to send back to Spain and to France and to England and to Germany, etc. So this is a quote that it would be my privilege. I'm taking it from Federici's book. And this is a quote from a journal that a Latin explorer from probably Portugal, and he is saying what the people there say about the colonializers who are plundering them. And so they say that we have come to this earth to destroy the world. They say that the wind ruins the houses and cuts the trees and fire burns them, but we devour everything. We consume the earth. We redirect the rivers. We are never quiet, never at rest, never satisfied. And then we gamble with it. We make war, kill each other, rob, swear, never say the truth, and have deprived them of their means of livelihood. And finally, they curse the sea, which has put on the earth such evil and harsh children. That's Girolamo Bensoni, 1565. I think that's where much of the destinies of European women and men of this colonialized world, and I have to say European men too, of course, they got screwed over too, whether they know it or not. We do have a common destiny, and I think that we're going to get out of it if we first claim our bodies and first get our own strength as women, and then join together. And the only way we're going to do that, by the way, you can go online and you can order this speculum and you can do it by yourself, and many women have, and it's not a bad idea in and of itself. But in order to really understand, or even a glimpse of what our power are as women, you try getting on the table, putting in that speculum and letting women come around you, look at you, and then talk and chatter and get rid of all that crap about modesty and everything, then you're, you know, going to realize what it means for women to work together. Now, the women in the communities around the world, the colonized women, they had their means of dealing with their fertility also. And it got destroyed by the priests. And their power as women was also destroyed. But they actually are a little bit ahead of us in the sense that, you know, the colonizers didn't always go up to the highest mountains, to every little village or something. So we still have some amounts of our power still up there. But you know, I think what Federici has done is that she's helped us to see, and I've just given you the broadest outline of this, it is so much more in it, is that this rise of capitalism and the fact that it has now going global and the whole world is going that way, is both what presently divides us, but potentially can unite us. And I'm speaking now as a white woman. I'm very, very, very white. My children are white. My grandchildren are white. And, you know, that's what I was born. And so I'm speaking, you know, as somebody who has had certain privileges. I certainly recognize that, continue to. But until I realized, and I did realize this many years ago, and I came to realize it even more sharply with Federici's book, all women really have to hate capitalism because they're the ones that did it. And certainly all people of color should definitely hate capitalism. And as I say, I'm not talking about, I want to be clear about this, I'm not talking about switching over to some alternative social economic system. That may come in time, but I'm talking about a transformation. I'm talking about beginning to talk to each other, beginning to share our values. I think this is what I'm talking about. I think this will get the ball rolling toward making a new society. And let me just check my notes for 2 seconds. I want to be sure I haven't missed some very essential thing that, and I don't have you in person to give me these questions, so I have to anticipate them. Oh, I didn't mention all the other plagues that took place. When we say high wages, I was struck because when the population went down so far in the villages, workers, you know, that worked on the farm, a day's work, they could make enough to buy a farm animal, enough wages to buy a pig or a cow. I mean, people don't make that kind of money today. I mean, we're talking a few $1,000s. So, you know, this, and by the way, oh yes, here's another point to bring up, is that I mentioned the revolts. There were many revolts, and you probably don't hear this. I hadn't. I've taken world history, European history, I've read a lot of books, seen a lot of movies, but I did not realize that there was a tremendous amount of unrest in that time, and a lot of workers were trying to establish a more communal life. Not communism, but a communal life. They wanted to have the commons. They wanted to have more sharing. They didn't think that some people should have all the wealth. They thought the people who produced it should have it. Now, I want to talk to you about what I think we can start to do. And by the way, I so much hope that you do read this book and others like it, And, it's Caliban and The Witch by Sylvia Federici. And this is the Autonomedia Press, just out this year. And I think I came up with, my ideas of what needs to be done. But I guarantee that if you go, it's a process. We don't just change overnight. I know that. I certainly never have. But gaining control of our bodies, reaching out, being with other women. And by the way, this is a female-only kind of thing. I just want to say that in line of the gender transitions that some people are making today, and more power to them. It does not qualify someone to participate in these because you really, unless you were born a woman, unless you have a uterus that can get pregnant, you are not at the center of the target of the rulers, because they still do this. Today, that's why we're losing abortion in the United States, or at least not totally, I doubt we will, but they're making it harder to get because they are worried that we don't have enough population. And you can read this if you will go to the library or look up population control. You will see that there are discussions going on at all levels of the government, all levels of the ruling class, about what to be done by the fact that we white women aren't having enough babies in the United States. And maybe that's one reason that white women have kind of focused on this as an issue, because they're the ones most under the gun to produce. Doesn't mean that women of color aren't under the gun also, but they're under the gun, to produce babies, to work in the factories and go in the army, etc. So we all, depending on how the capitalist system wants to use us, attack us. At any rate, I did come up with some of my suggestions, but I know that you will come up with your own. And I'm excited to have more people read this book, and I'd love it if they would get in touch with me and share their ideas, because I think that Sylvia's connected the dots, and it's a huge tool for us. I think what I've learned out of this, and Kenyofu Memelenko, who in Brooklyn has a wonderful program on reproductive awakening in her the Black narrative in America, she put her finger on it. She said, our power is in our uterus, and that is so true. And as long as they control it, then we're not in charge. As long as we pop those poison pills that they give us, those birth control pills have a terrible effect. Maybe they're, not going to die instantly, but a lot of women get a lot of depression from it. It changes their lives. And when you think about a young woman, like maybe in high school, starting on the pill, she hasn't yet experienced adult life very long. She doesn't really necessarily even know, who she is. Taking this pill, which changes every function in the body, every single one. These hormones go to every single function, just to keep us from ovulating. That's where we are today. That, or these IUDs, which, disrupt the uterine environment. These are being dispensed, in a population control environment by a national organization that whose aim is to reduce the population at any means, Planned Parenthood. And they, you're never going to see your cervix at Planned Parenthood, I assure you. And you're never going to be told about less harmful methods of birth control, or certainly how to have a baby, or you're not going to get any help whatsoever if you decide to have children, because that's not what they're all about. And so we're not, when we, I know I'm very sad to see abortion clinics, getting closed down. In fact, I'm outraged. But I know that we didn't gain that much in the first place. We need to, you know, we cannot delegate that. We can't fit into this capitalist scheme of women, you know, coming into the workplace, having careers. Sure, have a career, that's fine. But shouldn't, you know, our society see to it that our children have a decent upbringing and that we don't have to grab them out at 4 o'clock in the morning, get dressed, dump them at the child care place, you know, all day. This is not what women want. We want not only to control, you know, whether or not we have children, we want to control the lives of our children. And in today's world, not only are women, you know, not being able to do that, but they're, you know, supposed to like it. And in fact, they're supposed to adopt all of these, what shall I say, values of this capitalistic system. Anyway, let me go over some of my things. I'm going to read it here because it's just, I don't want to forget it. I've already said our bodies are the source of our strength. And each other, where it's a source of each other's strength. A pro-woman agenda, this means, see the way it is now, oh, you might wonder, what happened to the women's movement of the 70s? Well, I'll tell you what happened in a very short thing. It got co-opted. We got funded. The anti-natalist part of the movement, the people who want to see less babies, you know, they opened up clinics, they funded us. Then, on the other hand, if we wanted to have babies, and we do have a strong birth movement in our country, working for natural childbirth and promoting the use of midwives, we have accepted, in that movement, we've accepted the support of the Catholic Church. We've accepted the support of anti-abortion legislators. You know, now, where is that going to get us? You know, those of us that are outraged at the violence against women and against rape, what did we do? We accepted funding from the police. And that switched our battle, which at that time was to change men and so that a woman could walk down the street wearing whatever she chose to be wearing and not be afraid of being raped. Instead, the focus was on getting a rape kit together and going out and looking for the rapist and arresting him. Well, they don't even do that a lot of times. But if and when they do, the studies have shown that these always are prosecuted much more in men of color. It impacts on that community much harsher. Believe me, no white judge is going to ever get convicted of rape. I mean, it's not going to happen. So we have to. When I say we need to build a movement, it has to be without getting this funding from these capitalists. And believe me, we can do a lot just on our own. And at a certain point, I had one woman ask me, a professor, Daphne Spain from the University of Virginia, and she said, Carol, can't you ever get funding? Is there no time that anyone can get funding? And I said, yes. If you have an organization that you're strong enough, either through your own resources or through your community support, that if your funder pulled out, you would be able to continue and get your funding continued and maintain the integrity of your program, yes, then maybe you can think about getting funded. Unfortunately, we did it the other way around. The minute somebody had a good idea of what would be a nice project for women, their first thought was, well, where can we get the funding? Big mistake. So that is something we would want to change. And then all those enclosures that were put up. And of course, I think with women, where it hit us the worst was the enclosures of knowledge. Knowledge about how to control our fertility. And I think this is built into what I'm saying here is that sexism, racism, classism, until honestly each one of us gets the message to stop feeling guilty because you might have a little more money than the next person, or you might be of a race that, or an ethnic group that isn't as much prejudice, does no one any good. Nobody wants your stupid guilt anyway. What they want you to do is to change and to realize that what little privileges, what little benefits that you may get from those differences do not outweigh the harm that they are doing to you and your loved ones and to our society and to our earth. And when we get that perspective, we can, start to listen and take more interest and be more heedful of what people who are telling us. I know that certainly my quest for this information started off with an Indian American, a Native American woman, who talked to the midwives at the MANA, the Midwife Alliance of North America, and she talked to midwives about how their use of rituals that were taken from the Indian tradition were harmful to the Indian people and not helpful at all. And, the sweat lodges, the dream catchers, all these things that so catch people's imaginations, actually are taking away from the heritage of the Indian people. And she looked at us in the audience and she said, we were mostly white women in the audience, or settlers, as she said, the correct term for us we were the settlers. And she looked at us settlers and she said, why don't you look to your own history? See if Well, when she said that, I was devastated. I just felt inwardly so forlorn. I thought, what heritage, what history? Well, I went looking, and sure enough, I'm finding out, from several books and a lot of studies that have been done recently about the use, how these birth control methods work, these herbal methods, etc. I'm finding out we had a tremendous heritage and that we do need to reclaim it. And that, I think, is the ultimate path for us to go. And this will lead us, I keep thinking here that if we can learn the history from our point of view, not what they have told us is our history, then I think we will develop the kind of strength and ultimately can that unite with all the peoples that have been harmed by capitalism. Thank you.